Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome everyone to our end of season show, season in review, the longest season ever.
It certainly felt that way. It's weird that it's over because it felt interminable for a long time there.
It sure did, and there was some good things that happened here and there, but yeah, it was more of a kind of felt like an endurance race, really. Like a really long, never-ending endurance race. But that's finally it has ended.
Yes, and but I wrote about that a little bit. I published the piece this morning because I was sitting there thinking about it, and there were because I wanted to compare it kind of to 2014. With the hope that looking forward, and there's some good news. We could talk about that. Kind of some more good signals about some significant improvements and spending and personnel and things like that moving forward. But you guys are thinking about it, and by and large, right, we talk about 2015, how much fun that season was, and how it really ushered in the Cubs as this competitive team, right? And then 2016, obviously, and even the following year. But when you look at 2014, like by and large, that season gets forgotten. But you start looking at those things, you're going, well, that was Jake Arrieta's first full season with the Cubs. He was incredible that year. And the first game I went to, I had my buddy's bachelor party. We were in the bleachers for his first start of the season, and they shut out the Cardinals, and that was really cool. And you look at other things. They made the Jeff Samardzija trade, which obviously things didn't work out well, understandably, with Addison Russell, but that was still that was a big deal at the time. Like, that was a huge thing that happened in there, and so there were moments, there were events and things that happened in that season that laid the foundation for what was going to come. And so I think a lot of times we don't notice it in the moment. We don't see a lot of those things happen. But when I look back on this year, I would like to think that there maybe were some events, some I call them movements rather than moments, but that we can look back on and say, hey, that season kind of sucked to slog through. But, A, B, and C, we'll see kind of aftershocks or whatever of those in future seasons. So now that it's over, I think it's easier to kind of zoom out, take that perspective, and we can do it without having to worry about, like, what the hell's going on? Who are these guys? So.
It did take a while to kind of get to know the team. I mean, there are a lot of guys that we didn't expect to hear from or see that actually ended up making an impact. Javier Assad, Adrian Sampson were two guys that kind of fit that bill. And we'll get into those guys a little bit more. But yeah, it was definitely a year of, and I think last year the second half was the same way with obviously Patrick Wisdom. We kind of knew who he was, but Frank Schwindel, guys like that, just trying to get to know who they were, and then this year just kind of felt like an extension of that, and we knew it going in. And so I tried to go back and find out. I could not find our season predictions, what our win-loss predictions were. I'm pretty sure you and I were both right around 70 wins, which is basically where they ended up. But they had 74. Hold on, let me go and see. Where'd they end up with? 74 wins?
Is that what it was? I forget.
It's so forgettable. So we are one
day more than 71. I know that. So
one day removed from the season, and it's so forgettable. Yes. So let's see. They had last season. They had 71 wins. They were 71 and 91, and then this season they were 74 and 88. So the first half they were 35 and 57, and then the second half they were 39 and 51. So comparing it to 2014. The Cubs were 74 and 88 this year. 2014, they were 73 and 89, only one game worse. They had a second half record in 2014 of 30 and 35. This year, they had a second half record of 39 and 31. So really interesting to kind of compare it to that period where we know what's happened and what happened coming off of 2014. And I would say that, the expectations going into 2015, I mean, I don't think the Cubs are going to win 97 games next year. like they did in 2015. But going into 2023, the expectations would definitely be an above 500 team for sure, probably close to 90 wins.
Well, especially like unless in the Brewers, unless they go out and spend a ton of their own money, right? I mean, who do they have, right? I mean, they've got solid pitching, but we've seen that depleted. It's not nearly on the level that it was even last year all the way around. I mean, we look at Christian Yelich, like he's not the MVP type dude. Like the reason they were able to stay afloat as long as they did was they had him, and then Lorenzo Cain was good for a couple seasons. They still had Ryan Braun for part of that, but that they don't have the firepower to continue to compete. The Reds aren't trying to get better anytime soon. The Pirates have some good young guys, but they are not going to make any moves to go out and spend, even tens of millions of dollars, right, to supplement that. They're going to have to hope that O'Neill Cruz and some other guys continue to get a lot better. So Key Brian Hayes is another one, right? The Cardinals, obviously, they've got their guys. Now, do you count on Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt to continue to? I mean, Goldschmidt had a phenomenal season. Just incredible.
But he's always been good, so that's not surprising.
Right. He has been, although this is better than what this is actually the season he had, I think by WAR might have been better than anything Pujols did, which is kind of hard to believe because Pujols was insane. But but there's another one. Pujols led the National League in home runs in the second half. He's done. And even if he comes back, which would be weird. Yeah. That's not happening again. So there's not, that NL Central is not something that all of a sudden is like going to take a lot of room and a lot of effort to break into the top part. To be competitive. And the one thing is, you don't necessarily need to win. It would be great to win. It'd be better to win. But if you figure you're playing in a division that's got 2 sub 500 teams and another one in the Brewers on the way down, if you could beat up on that division, now it's a little bit less because the balanced schedule moving forward kind of takes a little bit of that out of it. But there's again, there's not a whole lot. If you look at everything, they're going to spend some money. I think they're going to spend a lot of money actually because they can, and that's before Jason Hayward's money even falls off the books. So they'll still have room even the following year. But I think they're going to do it in a measured way. I don't necessarily think we'll see something like with the Rangers going to getting Simeon and then Seager, right? Like they spent a ton of money on their middle infield. But I mean, I don't think it's beyond imagination at all to see them sign 2 premier free agents. I don't think that's out of the question in the least. And I've done so. I got something coming out a little bit later, and I think I might have done some of the cocktail napkin math on here. But if you look,
that's the only kind of math we do here.
Well, right, there's no real math. Well, you did a ton of real math when we were working when we had nothing else to talk about in 2020. Remember how much math we worked on to figure out like how much money the player the contracts were valued at. But
I still have those spreadsheets going, man.
That's something. But if you look at they drew over 3 million, around 3.1 to 3.2 million fans from 2016 to 2019, right? Every season. And that's paid attendance. Their paid attendance this year was 2.6 million. Now that alone is a difference of about 500,000 fans. Now, were all 3.2 million people there in that paid attendance figure? No, but I would be willing to bet a large sum of money that there were fewer paid attendance. Like the gap between the paid number and the actual number was larger this year with fewer fans overall than what it would have been in 16 when they drew 3.2 million. Like I would say maybe they actually drew 2.9 or 3 million. I would say this year, if the paid was 2.6, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the real number was like 2.1. That's only about 6,000 fans per game. And I'm going to go ahead and say, like, there were games, dude, where there were like 5 people at the bleachers. So anyway, where I'm drawing that, where I'm going there is 500,000 fans times a $60 average ticket, there's 30 million bucks. And if you take another 500,000 fans below that, who definitely didn't show up out of that 2.6, and then you assume, if you look at the fan cost index, that's about $34 per person in spending somewhere else, right? And so depending
Okay.
on where that number falls, you could be up to about another 20 million or so in terms of unspent, unrealized concession spending. So we could be looking at $50 million in revenue that just wasn't there due to fans.
And so,
Actually, that'd be a
where are
bigger
you
number
going?
because it'd be a
I'm trying to
million
figure out
people.
where you're going with this,
Where
because
I'm
it's
going
like,
with it
are you
is,
saying that they're going to
yes.
have that revenue next season to spend?
Well,
or...
no. They can't spend it because they never got it. But it's actually a million less than 3 points. So about 2.1 is a million less. So it's about 35 million. Now we're at about 65 million. Where I'm going is, a lot of people say, I don't trust them to spend because I think owners will make more money by having a shit product and having people not show up. Well, what I'm saying is they're missing on about $65 million in revenue simply from fans not showing up, not being there at games that would be there if they filled the ballpark, right? So that's about 65 million less.
I don't think that's important. I don't know if you're talking about one of the comments.
No.
that
I'm not
we
talking about.
received.
I want to make sure because I know a lot of people are still skeptical of it, but I'm saying just that alone. Plus, I think it's going to continue to drop off. Like this year was a big drop from last year, and people are pissed. And if you go another year and don't get after it in a meaningful way, you're going to lose even more fans. Like, people
So you're
aren't
saying
in a
scenario where the front office doesn't sign anybody. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if
the
they
Cubs
don't
add
meaningfully go
anybody,
out, they could add, right? You could
they're going to
spend a
have
lot
to
of
add
money
here and there,
right?
right?
That's what I'm saying. They could spend, quote unquote, a lot of money and not meaningfully upgrade the team, because if Wilson Contreras is gone, if they, maybe they trade I don't know, something happens like that, right? And all you do is kind of replace bodies, and you do so at a rate that, you go get some guys who are mid-tier and they're, $10 million a year, and you get 4 of those
You
guys.
mean like
Okay, well,
2017 and 18?
yeah. I mean, you
And
could
19.
you could say you spent money, but that didn't actually improve anything. So if you go back out there again and you give us another team that's 10, 15, 20 games under 500, well, the money.
I do not see that happening.
No,
I don't think
either.
there's any way that happens.
But and that's what I'm saying is I think ownership is motivated to actually put a decent product on the field. And you can look at everything else. The fact that Cubs convention is coming back, the fact that everyone is saying the same thing about spending more money, the fact that, again, these things are moving forward, and there's a lot that you can look at. There's a great piece in The Athletic. They are building back from a baseball operations standpoint. The head count, right? They cut a lot of people from the baseball operations department during the pandemic. Though that head count, the personnel count, is supposed to increase back to pre-pandemic levels. They're dumping a bunch of money into the various facilities throughout. So there's a lot of stuff happening outside of just the player personnel budget that's already being increased and is expected to continue to do so. There's a lot of things going on there. You can't just rely on, putting some money into the Dominican facility, right? Like, that all has to follow. I think there's no way they don't get aggressive this winter.
I think we've totally gotten off script.
Yes.
I think this is our end of season awards show has gone in a little bit of a different direction, I guess. But no, I think I agree with all that stuff, but I also think that's kind of like like it's constant speculation. And so I'm gonna bring it back around. I'm gonna turn the wheel and bring it back to our end of season awards before we speculate too much about next year, to say I've got a list of things here, and we'll just go by each thing. Hopefully you've got your I'm sure you have inside your head, but
yeah, I didn't write it actually down.
Okay.
No, I didn't have time.
Look, I've got like
I haven't had time the last 2 days. It sucks.
All these notes. Season in review, biggest surprise. We'll start with you. Who was the biggest surprise this season for the Cubs?
For me, it was Nico Horner.
Okay.
Hitting double-digit home runs, establishing himself as a legitimate, solid defensive shortstop. I did not expect that. And I think him kind of being a much more reliable player and much more impactful with the bat than what I expected. So that's my surprise.
My surprise is Adrian Sampson. I mean, here's a guy who the Cubs DFA'd and then Seattle DFA'd, and still he ended up with a 3.28 ERA and a 1.3 WAR over 19 games. I would say Horner was definitely. I have Horner in some of the other categories, but in terms of the biggest just outright surprise, it was a guy called named Adrian Sampson who was really good for the Cubs down the stretch.
Yeah, very good.
Biggest disappointment. Now there's a whole bunch of players that fit into this.
Yeah, it's man.
Yeah, it gets tough. I've got 3 written down. I'll have to go with one, but
yeah, I'm gonna go Frank Schwindel on this one.
Really, but did you have high expectations for him or just hopes?
I didn't have very high expectations, but I mean the dude got demoted twice, really, and then finally let go.
Okay.
I really thought he could at least be. I didn't think he'd be anywhere near what he did last year, right, on an overall scale. But I thought he could at least be a serviceable, everyday type of first baseman who, hey, if they had to work in a platoon with a lefty bat like Alfonso Rivas, but yeah, it was disappointing. And I guess the disappointment goes beyond just like his performance, right? But it's like, it sucks because he seems like a really good dude too. You know what I mean? So it's just disappointing that like he's not part of the organization anymore. So, yeah.
So I had kind of 3 different possibilities written down here, and I'll tell you what my possibilities were. One was Patrick Wisdom's defense, which was absolutely just awful. The other was Nick Madrigal, and the last was Wade Miley. And I am going to go for my biggest disappointment, Wade Miley. And simply, I mean, he pitched really well when he pitched, but he only pitched, I think, 8 games. And so the disappointment there was just that he just did not contribute at all. And I really do think that if we have a healthy Wade Miley, especially in the beginning of the year, that would have changed kind of the outcome of the season, or at least potentially changed it.
Yeah, and Carlos mentions Kyle Hendricks as one as well. I mean, Hendricks had just an awful season.
That's not such a disappointment because he really just built
he was coming off pretty bad. It was like, that's kind of what he did. And I think there are probably some people who would say a Suzuki, which I think is silly because especially with the way he finished. I mean, he did really well.
Think about Seiya Suzuki, and I would say he wasn't the biggest disappointment for me, but I would say like after the way he started,
right?
If I base it on what I thought,
like compared to his first 2 weeks, it's like rookie of the year, maybe MVP. And I think like had Marcus Stroman not finished really strong, there's a potential there for that because there was a while there where it was like, dude, and there was some Jekyll and Hyde with his home and away. There's a few different spots there. But I think it to me it kind of comes down to like for some of these guys who you would hope, and at least again with Suzuki, with Stroman, with some of these others, you look at it like, okay, you have a very clear spot in the future. And at the same time though, I look at it like, am I really disappointed about Schwindel because I really want Mervis to get a spot? So it's like it's tough. So
yeah, it was kind of a tough year, and I mean there's a whole list of other candidates you can go down. Obviously, best defender. I think this is a no-brainer, but go ahead.
I'm going to go off the reservation, baby, because I know where you're going. So I'm going to say Ian Happ and left. Ian Happ played.
I mean, you're just saying that because really the best defender is Nico Horner.
Well, but Happ played close to Gold Glove level defense in left field. He played really, really well out there. And I didn't want to both go with Nico Horner, and I've already given that answer. But I think Happ goes unrecognized for a lot of what he did. Like nobody ever talks about his defense, but he was really good out there and left.
Okay, fair. I get that. I mean, and the thing with Nico, as we're touching on him, is he's high contact, low power guy.
Can we touch on him?
High contact, low power guy.
Get a restraining order.
Uncomfortable.
Okay, that's what he said.
High contact, low power shortstop, great defense. So it's kind of like when you stack him up against some of the other shortstops in the league, who are high power, maybe much lower contact guys. It's an interesting position for the Cubs to be in with Nico Horner going into the offseason, where they clearly need to upgrade in the infield, particularly at either shortstop or third base, or you could even argue second base, depending on who's going to play second next year. It's kind of a puzzle, the infield right now. And I think Nico's performance this year makes it a lot more murky, if that makes sense. I think if Nico wouldn't have been what he was, so good, so much better than I think the expectations were going into this season, that you'd say, you'd have to replace pretty much, the entire infield for the most part.
Yeah.
And so with Nico's really the only solid person I would say belongs on that infield, and it's a matter of where he ends up. Maybe you could say Christopher Morel.
Yeah, I will say a lot of Horner's defensive value, though, was generated on the right side when he played over there in a shift, which is not going to be possible this coming season. Mm-hmm. So it does make me wonder, are the Cubs looking at that and saying, gosh, you could be an elite defensive second baseman. We could get a Trey Turner or someone who's got a ton of speed, still has a good glove, right, and a lot of pop. Like Turner's got a lot of power. It doesn't really look like. So now all of a sudden, if you're talking about, well, now you've got Nico Horner with a great glove at second and, double-digit home run power and speed, and now you got Trey Turner with 25 home run power and a ton of speed. Man, that middle infield could be, that could be really impressive. And because without that shift, you are going to now need to step that up to where I think Madrigal had a lot of things patched over with his own defense by being able to play second base with a shift behind him, because there were some issues on that side. And so now all of a sudden, oh boy, I would not mind at all seeing a middle infield of Turner and Horner. But again, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. They're going to have to make an upgrade there when we'll touch on that here in just a minute. Best starter.
As far as starting pitcher? Ooh, man. I think I got to go Steele. I got to go Justin Steele. I think that would have been an easier choice if he had finished, because I look at like the way Stroman finished really strong. Part of me wanted to go like Hayden Wesneski, but again, small sample, all that. So I'm going Steele. I wish he would have finished the season strong, but I really, really like the way he came back, because he had kind of a rough start there where he was getting completely screwed by his defense, and he really figured some stuff out. And I love what I see there.
Yeah, you're right. The first quarter of the season for him, he was up over 4, near 5 ERA when he started out, and it was largely because of the bad defense behind him, which the Cubs cleaned up. But yeah, my guy is Justin Steele as well. 4-7 over 24 games. He ended up with 119 innings pitched, 9.53 Ks per 9, which was tops on the team. All that with a 317 batting average on balls in play against him, which is actually higher than MLB average of around 300. So
and
that's
not what
impressive.
You want with that defense that he had behind him. The last thing you want to do is get a lot of those balls in play. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And a 3.18 ERA. Justin Steele definitely looking like a guy who's going to be a dude for the Cubs into the future. Best reliever, best relief pitcher.
Oh man,
it's tough.
Scott Efros.
Yeah, I thought that too. But let's say somebody who's on the team.
I'm. So here's another one where I'm torn, because part of me wants to say Keegan Thompson because I like him in that role a lot better. But I'm going to go Brandon Hughes. I like what Hughes was able to do throughout the season, stepping up and really taking on that high leverage role late, especially for a guy who only started pitching after he became a professional, right? The Cubs drafted him as an outfielder. So to see him make such a quick rise through the system tells me that he's still got a whole lot to learn. And yeah, I think he was there. He was the most consistent force and could pitch about anywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And he's a lefty, so there's always value there, right? But I'm going to go with Keegan Thompson. I have to go with Keegan Thompson. I mean, he was just so dominant out of the pen. A 1.47 ERA, a 10.31 K per nine. It's just 4-0. I mean, he was literally unhittable coming out of the bullpen, and that's really where I see him playing in the future. Okay, final MVP for the whole team, most valuable player. I think we're gonna have the same one.
I don't know, unless you're gonna say Ian Happ, because I'm going Happ.
Are you?
I'm going Happ. Yep. I just
okay.
I I mean, obviously there's Contreras for the leadership side of things, but I also I looked at that, and I look at the injury late because he missed about a month there, and what we've seen from and I part of this I might be kind of like talking myself back away from him, right? Like knowing that he's gonna probably be gone, but this is a dude who we've seen pretty consistently have health or stamina issues in the second half of the season routinely. But I look at Happ, and Happ got off to such a hot start. But I think, again, as I mentioned about his defense, like he was there every day and left. He was there every day. Like, again, he did not maintain exactly what we saw from that first half. But again, being able to just be that switch hitter in there every day and like one of the few guys who you knew every day, like, okay, left field is Happ, with the rare just a rest day. I think that consistency was key for me.
Okay, fair enough. And he showed some good power from the right-hand side, which was a nice change. I'm going to go with Nico. I think, as you mentioned, I mean, he could have been the biggest surprise on the team. I think in some ways, he was the biggest surprise. Definitely.
That's what I said. So I think he was.
Weird that you would agree with that. Yeah, so definitely Nico Horner MVP. But I'm hoping that next year that's not the case. We need somebody else to be the MVP because we have somebody who's got a lot of power back there, which is kind of gets us into our next topic here, which is the Cubs' biggest needs heading into 2023. There's all sorts of opinions on Twitter about what the Cubs' biggest needs are.
Never.
I see the thing that makes me scratch my head the most is where people are saying the Cubs need 2 starting pitchers. I don't even see how that's possible. I think that there's a world where they could not add a starting pitcher going into next year, and that would not surprise me at all. But go ahead, tell me what you think the Cubs' 3 or 4 biggest needs are.
So if they're going to add a pitcher, it needs to be an ace. I would like to see a bona fide ace pitcher. Okay. Left-handed power, preferably at first base.
Okay.
And, I think from there, what I would like to see is a very strong defensive center fielder / right outfield. Like whether that's, again, we've got left and right, unless Happ moves, right? You assume Brennan Davis will be coming up. Pete Crow Armstrong will come up at some point, but I really think, and then, and I guess I should have gone with this, a big bat, an infield bat. And so I'll say second or short, right? So the center field thing is like more of a backup. I'm not talking about big money guy right there. But if you can if you can go and you upgrade whatever position, move Horner to second, and now you sign a shortstop, or you sign one of the guys who is shortstop, he moves over to second, whatever. But if you shore up that defense and offense up the middle and then have that guy at center, because, God, their center field defense was atrocious this year. Michael Hermosillo was their best defensive player at center, and he couldn't hit a lick. So if you can just get somebody out there, that would be so nice. And then up the middle with the contact profile those guys have, I think that helps you out. You can shuffle a few guys over. You can kind of figure out third if you need to, move some other guys around. So yeah, lefty bat, big bat, middle infield, ace pitcher, and then if you kind of get a glove first outfielder to kind of move around a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you on most of those things there. Definitely a power lefty bat, and a starting pitcher. a
Shohei
top of the
Ohtani fits
rotation.
both of those. Boom.
That's where I was going to go. Shohei Ohtani. I really think he needs to be the Cubs' #1 priority going into the offseason for just a whole lot of reasons. Obviously, he covers two of their biggest needs, and he's going to bring a ton of interest and money to Tom Ricketts and his family. I mean, Wrigley Field will be packed every single home game to see Shohei Ohtani play baseball. There's that's a guaranteed return on your investment as long as he's healthy. And so I think that needs to be their #1 priority is Shohei Ohtani for those many reasons. And then I agree, the infield needs a little bit more power for sure. I think Matt Mervis comes up. He's the first baseman. He's already looking good in the few games that he's played here in the Arizona Fall League. But I think they need a shortstop. Well, really, I think what they need is a third baseman. They need one of the shortstops being Turner, Correa, maybe. Correa did not impress me this year. His numbers are not that great. And I mean, he had good power numbers, but that was about it. And his WAR was right about the same as Nico's. So they're just Dansby Swanson to me feels like somebody who would be a great add. But then if you bring him in, can he play third base?
I'm sure he can, but does he want to? And that's kind of the
and
thing
then you
is
move
like
Nico to second. And then what do you do with Nick Madrigal and Christopher Morel? So, I mean, I just think that, in order to clarify everything, maybe there needs to be a trade. I just don't see Nick Madrigal being a part of this team. I just don't. I think he's a good kind of contact guy, but that's all he is. And while I think that it's good to have that, I think you've got that with Nico. And I think Mervis is going to add to the power, but the outfield is the biggest. It's not the biggest question for me because I think Brennan Davis either starts in center field or he will start very shortly after the beginning of the season. But then PCA, how do you've got Ian Happ.
Well,
You've
Happ's
got
only going to be there for a
Suzuki.
year.
Yeah, I'm talking about next year, though.
I don't, PCA's not coming up right away. I mean, he hasn't played a single inning at Double-A yet. I think they need to give him some time. I mean, he's only 21 now. And so I think they give him some time, right? You let him figure that stuff out. And I mean, heck, Hap could still be traded. It depends on who you go and get too, right? Because you could use some of those guys in a DH role if you need to kind of rotate that around and use it. I mean, Mervis makes sense there, but I don't think Crow Armstrong is up until late season, at which point you can kind of start figuring some things out if you need to. So I think for this year, I don't think it matters that much. That's why I'd like to go see them, find a 1-year deal on ideally an elite defensive center field type who doesn't need to play every day, but a guy that you can put in there late. And I was, I see a lot of people talk about, closer and all that stuff. I don't think the bullpen's going to be an issue at all, man. I think we talked about Hughes, between Hughes, Thompson, Alzolay, Danis Correa, Jeremiah Estrada, Manuel Rodriguez. I mean, there are a number of guys who I think could either work in that closer's role, who could do multi-inning. I mean, because one thing we've seen from Thompson and from Alzolay is working those high leverage late multi-inning appearances. I don't know if they go with like a set closer at all, or if they just start. Yeah, Cody Hoyer. Cody Hoyer's another one. He'll be back next year. That guy looked great when they figured it. He's still working some stuff out between his fastballs. I think they have got. You said they could almost go in and not sign a starter. I'm going, and I know obviously they will sign some relievers, but hell, man, you could look at this roster and go like, you could construct a bullpen just out of guys you've already got in the system. That probably wouldn't be that wise just because of the lack of experience, but woo, that'd be fun.
Yeah. I think that's true. Which is strange to kind of feel like the Cubs are going into a season with, not a lot of issues around their starting and relieving relief pitchers. But you got to feel good about that.
Yeah.
And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And then kind of the final piece that needs to fall into place is what's going to happen with Wilson Contreras. The Cubs are going to have to give him a qualifying offer. And here's I don't want to say this, like I don't want to say it into existence type of thing, but I think the demand for Wilson Contreras is going to be a lot lower than what he or anybody else thinks. And I think we saw that at the trade deadline. The Cubs thought that they could get a lot more for him than they could. The offers did not come in. And I think the biggest issue with Wilson Contreras, as we've said for years, is his defense, and so where it's quite possible that he is a Cub again next season. Like, I think it's 50-50 because I just think he's going to go out on the free agent market with that QO attached to him, and he's going to see his just value diminished well below, I think, what he thinks, unless some team steps up and surprises me.
Yeah, I mean, but he's only got so many days to accept it, right? So I don't even know if I don't think he ends up accepting it because I mean, unless like there are zero feelers, and
you do like a Dexter Fowler did, right?
Yeah, I mean,
where Fowler got the QO, he rejected it, but he ended up coming back.
Yeah, and I mean that, and that's possible, but so it could happen, but I don't think, but I think at that point, I don't think the Cubs would want him back. Like I think if he accepted the qualifying offer, the Cubs would be okay with that. But I don't know that they really want to work something out with him. I'm not entirely. I mean, and Sahadev,
so you think he
Sharma wrote about that. If he rejects the qualifying offer, I don't think that the Cubs would really be interested in bringing him back unless it's on significantly reduced deal. Like, I don't think he gets a really good deal from him.
And if the Cubs sign Shohei Ohtani, there's no way they want him back because Contreras is not going to be behind the plate very much. I mean, we've seen Yan Gomes is a far better defensive pitcher, far better manager of the staff.
Yep. And that's, look, it's not a direct 1-to-1 correlation, but it's also not insignificant that the pitching staff was really, really good down the stretch. And Contreras missed a month in that time and was largely DHing right when he came back and even before, right, because of the ankle thing. So that there's something to be said there, right? He got a lot of praise. So I think, again, the issue becomes, if the Cubs say, listen, dude, we'll sign you. And this is so I talked about this. I wrote about it a long time ago, early in the season, when I said, and if you looked at his time, there was two things going on. The Cubs wanted to DH him a lot more to be able to keep his legs fresh, right? So he could be better and stronger throughout the season. We saw that happen. I mentioned earlier that he kind of fell off, but that was, largely based on injury and not like a hamstring thing like we've seen before. But he still did fall off a little, right? But there he was, mostly the batting average power was still there. So there's some good numbers still there. But the other thing is a DH is much, much, much less valuable than a catcher. If you're talking about an elite level player, like an elite level DH and an elite level catcher are entirely, if they're producing offensively at the same level, you're going to pay a hell of a lot more for a guy who can catch and produce like that. But that's why I was like, are the Cubs kind of tanking his value? Because they could look at this, and if they were going to negotiate with him, they could say, dude, you're a DH. Your best numbers by far, and if you look at it and do the splits, his best numbers by far came as a DH offensively. And they're saying, hey, we'll bring you back. We'll give you X, but you're going to largely be a DH. You're going to be our second catcher. You'll catch once or twice a week. And that's how it's going to be. And I think that's why a lot of the reason that the value wasn't there. I mean, we heard rumblings about it, and some of that's gamesmanship, but that's why the Mets didn't want to offer that much. And if you got Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer, and that's what you're leaning on, and they're saying, we've heard of, we don't really like throwing to this guy, or we don't really think we want to. So, I don't know. I think he'll get money from a team that's out there. He'll get money from somebody.
That QO just seems like a death grant, though. Yeah, it's just like once you have that attached to you,
and that's why I still can't believe like the players could have gotten rid of it with the international draft. And it's just funny to me. Like, I don't know that the players, I'm still not entirely sure what their big objection was to the international draft. I mean, I know that I
Yeah, there
think a
was a
lot of
lot of
it,
talk around it when it came when the
yeah.
deadline came and passed. We
I
just
think
didn't get a lot of
I
information.
think a lot of it's because there's so much investment in those local communities from the major league teams because they are in there going after them. And granted, it's shady as hell, but if nothing else, they're giving these kids who are 12, 13, 14 years old an education, sort of an education, better than what they'd be getting otherwise through these
Yeah.
baseball facilities, even if those are pipelines to absolute corruption and there's just a seedy underbelly to it. But I think the fear is that if there's an international draft, those teams then pull out from that because they cannot do the same thing that they've been doing. I think that's part of it. I thought it was kind of odd that Fernando Tatis Jr. was sort of one of them, like leading that. I'm like, dude, your dad played in the majors. Like you weren't really subject to the same issues. I mean, he was in those communities, right? And he knew that, but I still think that's odd because now you've still got this qualifying offer thing hanging over their heads, and it's such a shitty system for these players that just completely screws their value. So for a guy like Contreras who might have some problems anyway, now you're talking about giving up a pick. Excuse me. Although I do look at a team like the Mets that fumbled away that division down the stretch because they couldn't hit the damn ball. It's like, dude, you got two pitchers. I don't think Scherzer or DeGrom is going to have their value hurt a whole lot by having a catcher who's maybe a little bit worse at framing and blocking and game calling. Like, I think they'll still probably be okay. You needed somebody who could hit. So I think his value will still be okay. I just don't know the Cubs. I think the Cubs are more than happy to move on if they can make some other moves.
Yeah, I think so too. But it just depends on how that all plays out, and I think that goes into the. I mean, if they have Wilson Contreras, are they motivated to try to trade for Shohei Ohtani? And that's another question. Is Ohtani's a free agent after this year, and so do you really want to give up all these prospects to get Ohtani just a year earlier than you could get him, as a free agent? Now, of course, that means that he won't be traded to somebody else who then won't extend him. And so that's a possibility, I guess. And so you're kind of playing a game of Russian roulette there with Ohtani if you try to take that approach. So I don't know. I think the value of adding Ohtani to a team like the Cubs is so great that it's worth the financial investment. It's just a matter of what do the Angels want back in return?
Yeah.
Because obviously the Cubs are stocked, right? I mean, they've got plenty to trade from, but what we don't want to see happen is what happened, from 2016 through 19, where they traded off, their top prospects who went on to play for other teams. And the guys that the Cubs got were just really short-term guys that didn't end up sticking around, or guys that didn't perform well. And so obviously that's probably not going to happen with Ohtani. So,
well, and I think the thing there, like you have to, and assuming the Angels will allow it, which I have reason to believe they would, you'd have to have an extension worked out before you finalize the trade, right? That's got to be part of it.
Yeah, 100%.
Like the Cubs in particular would not do that trade and then watch him walk in a year. The other thing that's very interesting, and this is what leads me to believe he'll absolutely be traded, is the Angels already agreed to a contract figure with him for $30 million for next year, avoiding arbitration. You do not do that prior to the end of the season unless you want to establish that value very clearly heading into the winter. There's absolutely no reason. If you did not completely intend on trading him, you would just go through the normal filing process, let that go till about February or so, right? As it is, this tells me they are absolutely willing and motivated to move him. And, and I think that there is something to be said, right? Because we talk about Juan Soto and he got moved, but he was still under his rookie deal, right? He still has a couple years left. So it's a little bit different. So trading for a guy who's got $30 million salary and only 1 year is a little bit different. Granted, that's really like saying, well, it's really like $15 million salary for a pitcher and $15 million for a really high-end DH/hitter. But if the Cubs were to do that, now all of a sudden, hey, a couple of your pitching prospects may be freed up. A couple of your outfield prospects or hitting prospects, right? We just talked about the outfield and how that. So, yeah, that would be. And you want to talk about getting fans excited, bringing some people to the ballpark? and selling some freaking jerseys, like that's going to put a lot of butts in seats, and that's going to sell a whole lot of merch. And I would, they need to go sell some advertising on marquee to some Japanese outfits too,
exactly.
because between Suzuki and Otani, my God, they could really have. I mean, they could have the Asian market on lock in terms of getting some advertising out there, and that's normally been reserved for a lot of the West Coast, right? That's
well,
why.
and it was very interesting that drone video that the Cubs put out that was got a lot of play and a lot of hype. Ended with Shohei Otani, not Seiya Suzuki running out onto the field. I thought that was a very interesting player choice that they chose Seiya Suzuki, and I think it speaks to the perceived value that the Cubs have for Japanese player. You know, and that's
Senga,
big
baby.
Market.
Go get Senga. Go sign Senga out of Japan, the starting pitcher. Then you got Otani. Good Lord. That would, first of all, it would rile up a whole lot of people on Facebook, which would be really fun. But that's also like, you know, a little bit cheaper than maybe some of the guys, you know, you're talking like DeGrom and certainly Verlander, who's probably only looking for a 1-year deal anyway. I mean, there's some very interesting angles to all this, because like you know, we've said the whole time, like Ricketts isn't just going to go spend money just to spend it, but something like that. And if you're talking about being able to really sell your team to a different market, particularly now that the loss of WGN has kind of cut off the Cubs' traditional thoroughfares into the entire every corner of the United States, right? Well, now, hey, look at this. If you can get marquee streaming, and if you can get some rules changed on the TV front, you've got MLB.TV, and you've got all these other things, you do now all of a sudden have a really, really strong value prop to some different international markets that that would be very tough to match. I mean, you could all of a sudden that's not, then you're not just talking about, oh, how many more fans can we get to Wrigley Field? You're talking about a much, much bigger proposition. So, you know, is that alone enough to motivate them to do it? No, but it's certainly a nice value add.
Well, to there's the winning.
Insane, yeah.
The winning that would come.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's a huge addition to just it would not just be a baseball move. It would not just be a business move. It would be a very nice mix of the two. I would love it, because that's like, Otani's been my favorite non-Cub since the time he got into the league. I mean, as much as I wrote about this guy, I like to see that happen, and I'm getting myself all hyped up for something that's probably got a very, very slim chance, but I love just thinking about it.
I mean, gosh, yeah. Like I said, depends on what the Angels are at. And there's also the complicating factor of the Angels getting ready to change ownership here. You know, the organization is going to be up for sale. I'm not really sure how that works with, you know, a new owner coming in, the timing of that, what current ownership is willing to do or wants to do, and how that all works. But you know, I guess we'll see how that plays out. Postseason is upon us. Games start tomorrow. Thought we'd just do a quick postseason preview and get a little rundown. We've got Tampa taking on Cleveland, Seattle against Toronto, and then in the National League, we've got Philadelphia against St. Louis, boo, and the Padres against the Mets. I'm going to give you my choices. I'm going to let you go. Tampa, Cleveland. I'm going to go with Cleveland here. I just think they're an underdog in the series. Everyone is picking Tampa, and I think Cleveland steps up. Seattle, Toronto. I mean, they've got too much offense on that team. I don't know. And plus I just kind of like them. But I know, was it who's the young guy with Seattle? Rodriguez or no, you know who I'm talking about? The Seattle. You there?
Yes. I was just letting you kind of work your way through it.
They've got the young stud, and I think he'll be fun to watch. But I think Toronto wins that one. Philadelphia versus the Cardinals. I mean, obviously Philadelphia is going to sweep the Cardinals, and the Padres and the Mets. I mean, the Mets going to Mets. Like I was watching,
they've been Metsing pretty hard here toward the end of the season.
I was watching it. They're talking about not trying to get cute with DeGrom, so they're going to pitch Scherzer in game 1. And then depending on how game 1 goes, they may or may not pitch DeGrom in game 2 and or game 3. So I don't know. That just feels like a setting up to be really Metsy. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to go with the Padres there. And I think if I have to pick the World Series, I mean, listen, I I'm a traditionalist, so I'm going to say the Yankees versus the Dodgers, just because that's the most marketing, the biggest markets. Just seems like the funnest kind of outcome for me. Although I think Astros Dodgers would be fun for people just because of the whole, trash can gate, if that's what you want to call it, that happened when the Astros beat the Dodgers back in, was it 2017? But I think the Dodgers, I mean, it's hard to imagine the Dodgers not making it, although the Dodgers do have a tendency to choke here and there too. So what do you think? What's your breakdown
I
there?
think I'm literally taking the opposite of every one of your picks.
One of us will be right. That's
I'm
great.
going with the Rays. I'm going with the Mariners just because, although my high school mascot was the Blue Jays, and so I've always kind of felt a little bit of a kinship with Toronto. I do want to see with Seattle finally breaking their postseason curse. I'd really like, and I love those old Mariners teams. I mean, because back in the day, man, between Randy Johnson and Ken Griffey Jr. and Jay Buhner and all those guys, they were fantastic. So I'm hoping for the Mariners to take that one.
Julio Rodriguez, that's who I was talking about.
Yes. I would much prefer to see the Phillies win. However, that's another team that cannot seem to stop tripping over their own dicks here throughout most of the season. And the Cardinals, because God hates us as Cubs fans, I think the Cardinals end up winning that one. And then I feel like the Mets are going to figure out a way. Like, speaking of a team that just can't, like, the Padres for the last 2 years really have been
have so much talent.
Yeah. And it just, they can't seem to ever really put it together for any kind of a prolonged stretch. And I just think, as much like I do feel like karma is going to punish the Mets for the whole DeGrom thing, for like shutting him down late in the season. I feel like that's one of those where they're going to screw. So like Scherzer's going to get bombed in game 1, and they're going to like, crap, we got to lean on DeGrom, and then he's going to just get smashed right away.
Yeah.
And they're just going to screw it up because they're like, oh, now we got to have him go. Oh crap. Or it'll come down to like he'll pitch in the deciding game and just get rocked in the first inning or something, because that's,
and then that'll hurt his value, and the Cubs will sign him.
And
for
the Cubs can get him on the cheap,
$25 million a year.
Yeah, but I will come back around to, like, as I look at this as a whole, it's hard for me to pick against anybody but the Dodgers and Yankees. Here's what I will say though. I don't want either of them to win. I'm Team Meteor in that scenario. However, it would be super cool to see Scotty Efros get a World Series ring with the Yankees, see Anthony Rizzo get a World Series ring. Some of those guys, because I mean, that was that would be super cool. And so I have a vested interest in rooting for the Yankees, even though that pains me to say. I would really like to see it, because, and that's when I texted Scotty after he got traded, right? And I just said, go get a ring. Because it's like it sucked at the time, but I feel really good about the Cubs getting Hayden Wesneski, and that is looking really, really good. But hey, if you can go out there and win a World Series title, like, that's one of those things that so few players really truly get a chance to do. And to see somebody like that we've been able to interact with on here before, and to see again, a guy like Rizzo, beloved captain. Although I don't want Roger Maris Jr. to be really happy, so I guess that's working against me there. So we'll see.
Oh yeah, top breakout. I didn't touch on that earlier when we were doing our season in review. At top breakout, I had Hayden Wesneski, just FYI. Even though he only threw in just a few games.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's hard to really pick against that, because there were a few guys that popped up. I mean, I guess Hughes would be the other one, right? Because he kind of came out of nowhere. But I'll because I gave him the reliever thing, then that kind of fit. I do feel like Wesneski. I really wish it would have been Caleb Killian. I really wish we could have been saying some more things about him, and that was you could almost put him up there with disappointment, but it's like you can't, can you really judge on that little and say, but that was kind of tough. Or then you look at a guy like Matt Mervis, even though he didn't come up, like if you look at the organization wide and say, man, here's somebody who broke out, but yeah, I think Wisniewski is one of the few, or you could look at Sampson, right? But he's like 30, so it's that's tough. But there were a few guys I think that we could look at, and these were some pretty cool stories. Like I said earlier, where we could look back on that, and that would be like, whether it's Wisniewski or in general. Let's do this. I'll bring this back around, and I will say the Cubs pitching development as a whole. This was a huge breakout season. We saw Steele, we saw Thompson a little bit last season. We saw some of that start, but I think this year, like effectively looking at top to bottom throughout the organization, different players, different types of pitchers, being able to have success across multiple levels with guys who would come in and clearly were a product of this system, one way or the other, whether that's pro scouting, amateur scouting, or development. This is the year we're going to look at and say the Cubs turned a corner in terms of their pitching development. So that's my breakout.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I see that. All right, cool. Well, that's it for the show today. We'll circle back. I think we'll probably go to weekly, bi-weekly. I don't know. We'll have to figure it out and see what's happening. I expect there to be a lot of developments after the World Series and once we get into free agency. So it should be a really interesting offseason. And basically setting the table for what could be the next competitive window for the Chicago Cubs. It better be. We're going to have some issues.
Yeah. We're going to have to walk back this whole episode. I'm going to have to erase everything I said. Check the tape.
Yeah. So anyways, it's been a great season, Evan. Ranting with you.
Has it been? Yeah.
This has been great. The show's been great. I've really enjoyed podcasting with you and having fun, kind of being lighthearted and making fun of things, including ourselves. But yeah, it's been a good year. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's been fun to have the outlet, if nothing else, and then to be able to kind of track through this and to have. I think if people have followed us, it would be interesting to see which kind of main themes have remained the same throughout this whole time and which have kind of morphed a little bit. And I would say I think overall the optimism for the future has certainly grown over the course of the season, which again is really saying something with the way this season played out and where it was at one point to really sit there and look at like, oh my God, what the hell are they doing? To like, okay, it's starting to make a little more sense. So it's like an archaeological dig that we're bringing you all along for. Just dusting away dinosaur bones slowly,
a stew
once or twice a week.
Baseball stew that we have.
Darn right.
Getting ready to eat. So, okay, well, enjoy the off season, everybody, and we'll be sure to keep you informed as things develop. And that's it for us this week. Thanks for joining us.